Winter, 1803. On the western edge of London, Hammersmith was still partly rural, and after dark its roads could become almost completely black. Then residents began reporting something moving through the darkness. A strange figure. The reports were unsettling because the figure did not behave like an ordinary passerby. Witnesses described seeing a pale figure in the darkness, only for it to disappear from sight. Soon, stories of the apparition began spreading. The most important detail was its appearance. The supposed ghost was repeatedly associated with white clothing. In the darkness of the 18th century road, a pale figure could stand out dramatically, and that detail would become crucial to what happened later. The story became closely associated with Hammersmith churchyard and the surrounding streets. At night, the cemetery offered exactly the kind of setting where fear could transform an uncertain shape into something supernatural. As more people heard the stories, ordinary nighttime journeys became acts of caution. Residents watched the roads more carefully. Some carried lanterns, others avoided the areas where the figure was said to appear. Eventually, fear turned into action. Residents were no longer content simply to report the apparition. Some began watching the streets at night, hoping to discover who was behind the mysterious figure. Every retelling added another detail. Some accounts described the figure as approaching people. Others suggested it vanished before anyone could reach it. The more the story circulated, the less certain anyone could be about the origin. Then another sighting brought the story back into the darkness. A pale figure appeared again on the road, apparently alone. From a distance, there was no way to know who or what it was. But searches found nothing. No mysterious figure, no hidden doorway, no obvious explanation. The men returned empty-handed, and the absence of an answer only strengthened the belief that something unnatural was moving through Hammersmith. Among those who heard the stories was Francis Smith. Like others in the area, he became convinced that the apparition was a real threat. But unlike most of them, Smith would eventually decide that he was going to confront it himself. The stories had convinced Smith that someone, or something, was threatening people after dark. Instead of waiting for another sighting, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He would go out at night and search for the figure. Smith armed himself with a period firearm before leaving. He was not setting out to investigate a legend as a historian might. He believed he was preparing to confront a dangerous figure. Smith stepped into the winter darkness. The roads around Hammersmith were poorly lit, with only occasional lanterns breaking through the darkness. Somewhere ahead, according to the stories, the mysterious figure was still moving. He waited in the darkness, watching the road and listening for movement. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Then, somewhere beyond the nearby buildings, Smith noticed movement. A pale figure was now moving through the darkness. From Smith's position, the clothing appeared white against the night. After hearing so many stories, there was little room left in his mind for another explanation. Smith began following the figure. The distance between them slowly closed. Every step seemed to confirm what he already believed. He had finally found the apparition that had frightened Hammersmith. As Smith came closer, the figure became clearer, but not necessarily less mysterious. The pale clothing was unmistakable in the darkness. Smith now had to decide whether he was looking at an ordinary man or the ghost haunting Hammersmith. The figure's clothing would become one of the most important details in the entire case. In the darkness, the white garment made him resemble the descriptions circulating Hammersmith. But the man himself had no idea what Smith believed. Smith finally confronted the figure. In the darkness, fear and certainty collided. He believed he was facing the Hammersmith Ghost. The man standing before him, however, was not an apparition. He was a local worker returning home. The man was Thomas Millwood, a bricklayer returning from work. His white clothing had made him resemble the figure described in the ghost stories, but Smith remained convinced he had finally found the apparition. Smith confronted the figure and demanded that he stop. Millwood was simply walking home in his work clothes, but in the darkness, Smith saw something very different. He believed the figure standing before him as the mysterious apparition. Millwood did not disappear nor attack Smith. He was a local plasterer returning from a family visit, but his white clothing had already caused people to mistake him for the ghost. Now he was standing directly in front of an armed man. Whatever Millwood said, Smith remained convinced. The stories, the darkness, and the white clothing had combined into a single terrifying conclusion. He was not looking at an ordinary worker. He believed he was finally facing the apparition. Smith raised his weapon. The moment that followed was brief, but consequential. Millwood was still standing in front of him, unaware that Smith had mistaken his work clothes for the clothing of a ghost. Smith fired. The shot struck Millwood in the lower jaw, killing him. In an instant, the terrifying figure that Smith believed he had hunted for weeks was revealed to be an innocent man. Smith approached the fallen figure, and the truth became unavoidable. There was no apparition, no supernatural creature, no disappearing ghost. There was only Thomas Millwood, a working man who had been walking home in white clothes. Smith was soon taken into custody. The story that had begun with fear of a ghost had now become a murder investigation. Witnesses were questioned, Millwood's body was examined, and Smith was committed to await trial. At the Old Bailey, Smith faced a charge of murder. His defense raised an extraordinary question. Could a man avoid responsibility for killing someone if he genuinely believed he was defending himself from a ghost? Smith was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. The sentence was later commuted to 1 year's hard labor. The case would remain controversial because the killing had begun with a belief that the supposed victim was not even human. The Hammersmith Ghost was never conclusively identified, but Thomas Millwood was real, and he died because one frightened man believed he had found a ghost. More than 2 centuries later, that may be the darkest part of the entire story.